The courtroom was full. Not just lawyers and clerks, but neighbors, distant relatives, even people I barely recognized from my childhood. I could feel their eyes on me as the lawyer stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "this case proves that the defendant is financially irresponsible, effectively bankrupt, and unfit to manage any shared assets." A murmur spread through the room. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even look up. My sister sat behind him, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap. Calm, certain, victorious. She didn't need to say a word, her smile said everything. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a public execution. They wanted me humiliated, labeled, erased. And, for a moment, everyone in that room believed it had already worked. I kept my hands clasped tightly in front of me, staring at the grain of the wooden table. Every instinct in my body screamed to speak, to explain, to fight back. But I didn't. Silence was the only thing I still controlled. The lawyer continued, listing numbers, accounts, allegations, each one designed to strip away my credibility piece by piece. With every sentence, I felt the weight of judgment pressing harder on my chest. People whispered. Someone behind me shook their head in quiet disappointment. My sister never looked at me directly. She didn't have to. She had paid someone else to do the damage for her. I was 32 years old, sitting in a courtroom where my own blood had decided to destroy me in front of strangers. My name is Elena Carter. Until that morning, most people knew me as the quiet one, the dependable one, the sister who never caused problems, who handled things quietly while others took the credit. I worked hard. I stayed invisible. I believed that loyalty mattered. I was wrong. As the lawyer finished his statement, he sat down with the satisfaction of someone who thought the ending was already written. My sister finally glanced my way, just briefly. Her eyes carried no anger, only certainty. She believed I was finished. She believed this courtroom would be the place where my life collapsed in public. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that I hadn't come to defend myself. I had come to let the truth speak at the right moment. And that moment was closer than she thought. Growing up, it was always clear who my parents trusted more. It wasn't something they ever said out loud, not directly. Favoritism rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly in who gets forgiven first, whose mistakes are called learning experiences, and whose efforts are simply expected. My sister Marissa was the golden child, confident, loud, charismatic. From the moment she could speak, people listened. Teachers praised her leadership. Relatives admired her ambition. My parents often said she was strong, the kind of daughter who would never let life push her around. I was different. I was the one who stayed up late finishing assignments, who double-checked numbers, who fixed problems before anyone noticed they existed. I didn't demand attention. I earned trust quietly. Or at least, I thought I did. As children, the differences felt small. If Marissa forgot her chores, it was because she was busy. If I forgot mine, it was because I should have known better. When she failed a test, it was bad luck. When I succeeded, it was expected. Over time, those small differences hardened into roles. Marissa became the voice of the family. I became the backbone. When our parents started their small business, they naturally turned to her for public decisions. She negotiated. She smiled. She shook hands. I handled the spreadsheets, the schedules, the permits no one wanted to deal with. If something went wrong, I fixed it before it reached the surface. No one ever asked me to. They simply assumed I would. And I did. Because I believed that family meant contribution, not competition. By my late 20s, I was working full-time and still managing large parts of the business behind the scenes. I signed documents, temporarily. I covered shortfalls, just for now. I let my name stay off the spotlight because Marissa said visibility made her anxious, and I didn't want to create tension. She thanked me at first. But gratitude has a short lifespan when entitlement grows. The more I handled, the more invisible my work became. My parents began to refer to decisions I made as things Marissa approved. If a deal succeeded, she was praised for her instincts. If something failed, the silence pointed in my direction. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for recognition. I was doing it because I was capable, because I was reliable, because I thought that, eventually, fairness would surface on its own. But something changed when I started pulling back. I was 30 when I decided to set boundaries. Nothing dramatic. I stopped covering expenses without discussion. I asked for clarity before signing anything. I suggested that responsibilities be shared more transparently. Marissa didn't like that. Her tone shifted. Conversations grew colder. She began reminding me often and publicly how much she had built, how much pressure she carried, how exhausted she was from holding everything together. I recognized the pattern too late. To her, my quiet competence had never been a contribution. It had been a convenience. And the moment I stopped making things easier for her, I stopped being useful. That was when I realized something painful. My sister didn't fear my failure. She feared my independence. Because once I stopped standing behind her, the truth became unavoidable: she had never been standing alone. And she would do anything to make sure no one else discovered that. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. It came disguised as concern. Marissa started asking questions she had never asked before. Questions about cash flow, about timelines, about decisions I had handled quietly for years without challenge. At first, I welcomed it. I thought she was finally interested in sharing responsibility. I was wrong. Her questions weren't about understanding. They were about control. Soon after, I noticed subtle changes. Emails I was no longer copied on, meetings scheduled without my knowledge, decisions announced as final before I had even seen the paperwork. When I asked about it, Marissa smiled and said she was just trying to take some pressure off me. That smile felt rehearsed. Then the rumors started. Not loud ones. Not yet. Just enough to make people hesitate. A delayed response here, a guarded look there. Vendors who suddenly wanted everything in writing. A banker who asked if I was still involved. Still involved. That phrase stayed with me. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Marissa was on the phone in the hallway, her voice low but sharp. She stopped speaking the moment she saw me, smiled again, and said she had to go. Later that week, I found the name of a law firm saved in her laptop under consultations. I didn't confront her. I needed to understand how far she was willing to go. The answer came faster than I expected. Within weeks, whispers turned into statements. Statements turned into assumptions. Someone told my parents they were worried about my financial judgment. Another suggested I had taken risks without authorization. Marissa never said these things directly, but she never corrected them either. She let the story breathe. I watched as my reputation began to shift without a single accusation ever being spoken aloud. People stopped asking me questions and started asking her instead. Decisions I once made were suddenly reviewed. My authority eroded quietly, like wood rotting from the inside. When I finally asked her directly what was happening, she didn't deny it. She reframed it. "I'm just protecting the family," she said. "If something goes wrong, everyone will blame me. You wouldn't understand that pressure." I almost laughed. Pressure had been my constant companion for years. I just never wore it loudly. Soon after, she suggested that independent oversight might be a good idea. A neutral third party, legal clarity, transparency. She spoke those words as if they were gifts. What she meant was exposure. The day she officially hired a lawyer, she didn't tell me herself. I found out through an email addressed to everyone but me. It mentioned a review, an inquiry, and possible legal action to protect shared interests. Shared interests. I understood then that this wasn't about safeguarding anything. It was about rewriting history. I could have fought back immediately. I had documents, records, proof of everything I'd done, but something held me back. Instinct. People like Marissa don't just want to win. They want to be seen winning. They want the story told in public, with witnesses. So I let her build her case. I watched her grow more confident, more visible. She spoke with certainty now, as if the outcome was already decided. My parents stood beside her, relieved to believe someone else was finally in charge. And I stepped back. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew something she didn't. Plans built on manipulation require noise to survive. Truth doesn't. And when the noise stopped, when the right question was finally asked, everything she had constructed would collapse under its own weight. She thought this was the beginning of my downfall. In reality, it was the moment she revealed her hand. And once you see the hand clearly, the game is already over. The hardest part wasn't what Marissa did. It was who stood beside her while she did it. The meeting took place in my parents' living room, the same room where birthdays were celebrated and holidays once felt safe. Everyone sat in their usual places. My mother folded her hands tightly in her lap. My father cleared his throat more times than necessary. Marissa spoke first. She framed everything as concern. Concern for the business. Concern for the family name. Concern for transparency. She spoke calmly, confidently, as if this conversation had already happened many times without me. I listened, quietly. Then my father looked at me and said the words that changed everything. Maybe it's best if you step back for a while. Step back. As if I hadn't been carrying weight for years. As if my presence, not the accusations, was the problem. My mother avoided my eyes. When I asked her if she believed what was being implied, she didn't answer. She said she just wanted peace. Stability. Less tension. Peace, I learned that day, often means choosing the louder voice. Marissa slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents I recognized immediately. Contracts I had signed. Payments I had approved. Decisions I had made in moments when no one else wanted responsibility. Now they were being reframed as risks. Irresponsibility. Potential misconduct. I felt something crack inside me, not anger, not yet, but a sharp clarity. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't even about control anymore. It was about sacrifice. I was being offered up to preserve an illusion. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. That surprised me. You know I didn't do anything wrong, I said. You know I've always protected this family. Marissa didn't deny it. She leaned back and said something that still echoes in my mind. Then you shouldn't be afraid of letting the court decide. There it was. Not a suggestion, a challenge. My parents didn't stop her. They didn't question the necessity of it. They nodded slowly, as if legal action were a reasonable next step, not an act of betrayal. I realized then that I was no longer a daughter or a sister in that room. I was a liability. The decision had already been made. My role had already been rewritten. All that remained was my compliance. I stood up, gathered my things, and left without raising my voice. No one tried to stop me. No one followed. That silence was louder than any argument. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed every moment I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time I absorbed pressure so others could breathe easier. Every time I chose loyalty over recognition. And for the first time, I understood the cost. Family can betray you without hatred. They do it with calm faces and practical language. They do it while convincing themselves it's necessary. By the morning, my grief had turned into resolve. If they wanted to take this to court, I would let them. But I would not beg for understanding. I would not argue my worth. I would show up. I would listen. And when the truth had nowhere left to hide, I would let it speak for itself. That was the moment I stopped trying to belong and started preparing to be free. By the time the hearing officially began, the outcome already seemed decided. At least, that's how it felt from where I sat. Marissa's lawyer stood with practiced confidence, his suit perfectly pressed, his voice calm and precise. He spoke as if he were presenting facts carved in stone, not accusations built on implication. Each sentence landed cleanly, deliberately, leaving little room for doubt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He talked about patterns, about financial mismanagement, about a troubling lack of oversight. He referenced timelines, spreadsheets, bank statements, documents carefully selected to tell one version of the story. A version where I appeared reckless, isolated, and unqualified. I listened. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't flinch when my name was repeated, each time attached to another concern. I didn't react when he suggested that I had acted independently, without accountability, putting shared assets at risk. From the corner of my vision, I could feel the room shifting. People leaned forward. Pens scratched against notepads. Someone behind me whispered my sister's name in admiration. To them, she looked composed, responsible, brave enough to do what had to be done. Marissa played her part perfectly. She sat straight, hands folded, occasionally nodding at just the right moment. When the lawyer mentioned family burden, she sighed softly, as if carrying a weight no one else could understand. When he spoke of hard decisions, she lowered her eyes, the picture of reluctant leadership. If I hadn't known her so well, I might have believed it too. At one point, the lawyer turned toward me, just briefly, as if acknowledging my presence for the first time. The defendant, he said, has chosen not to respond to repeated concerns. This silence speaks volumes. A few heads turned in my direction. I didn't move. Silence does speak, just not always in the way people expect. My own attorney glanced at me once, subtly, a silent question. I gave the smallest nod. Not yet. The lawyer continued. He painted a picture where every decision I had made was framed as unilateral, every risk exaggerated, every success minimized. Context disappeared. Intent vanished. Only suspicion remained. By the time he finished, the room felt heavy with conclusion. He sat down slowly, confidently, as if placing the final piece of a puzzle he believed was complete. The judge thanked him and made a few notes. Then something unexpected happened. The judge didn't look at me. He didn't look at Marissa. He looked at the documents. He flipped through them carefully, one page at a time. The room grew quiet, not tense, but expectant. This was the pause before confirmation. The moment when authority seals the narrative everyone else has already accepted. Marissa shifted in her seat, just slightly. Still confident. Still sure. The judge leaned back. I have a few clarifying questions, he said. My sister's lawyer stood again immediately, ready. The judge raised a hand, not dismissive, just firm. Not for you, not yet. The lawyer froze. The judge's gaze moved across the room and landed, finally, on me. Miss Carter, he said evenly, you've remained silent through most of these proceedings. Every eye in the courtroom turned. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. He nodded once, then glanced back at the file in front of him. Before we continue, he said, there's something I need to understand. Marissa straightened. Her confidence didn't waver, but something flickered behind her eyes. A brief calculation, a tightening. The judge tapped the papers lightly. These documents, he said. These approvals, these decisions being questioned. He paused. Who actually signed them? The room went still. Not silent still. No whispers, no movement, no breath. The performance was over. And for the first time since this began, Marissa didn't look at her lawyer. She looked at me. For a moment, no one answered. Not my sister, not her lawyer, not even the people in the gallery who had been so eager to judge me minutes earlier. The courtroom held its breath, as if sound itself had been suspended. I stood slowly. I did, Your Honor, I said. My voice didn't shake. It surprised even me. The judge looked at me, then back down at the documents. All of them? He asked. Yes, I replied. Every contract, every approval, every decision being questioned today. Marissa's lawyer shifted beside her, flipping through his notes too quickly. The confidence he had carried moments earlier drained from his posture, replaced by urgency. He started to speak, then stopped himself. The judge raised a hand again. Miss Carter, he continued, were you authorized to sign these documents? I was, I said. In writing. I watching. I reached into my folder and placed a set of papers on the desk in front of me. My attorney stepped forward and handed them to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. The sound of paper moving felt louder than it should have. These authorizations, I explained, were granted over several years. Some were temporary, others were permanent. All were approved by the same individuals who are now questioning them. The judge read silently, his expression unreadable. Across the room, Marissa sat perfectly still. Too still. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't interrupt. She didn't object. She couldn't. The judge looked up. Miss Carter, he said, why did your name not appear publicly on these decisions? I took a breath. Because I was asked to stay behind the scenes, I said. It was presented as a matter of comfort. Image. Family harmony. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge nodded slowly. So the narrative presented today, he said, glancing briefly toward Marissa's lawyer, omits that context entirely. He turned another page. And this review, he added, was initiated after you began requesting clearer boundaries and shared accountability. Yes, Your Honor. The judge leaned back in his chair. The shift in the room was subtle, but undeniable. Suspicion, once aimed entirely at me, began to tilt. Questions formed where certainty had lived moments earlier. Marissa finally moved. She whispered something urgently to her lawyer. He leaned toward her, then straightened, his expression strained. The judge noticed. "One moment," he said calmly. He looked directly at Marissa for the first time. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone measured, "before we proceed further, I need you to answer a simple question." She swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." He held her gaze. "Did you ever object to your sister signing these documents before this legal action?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was revealing. And in that silence, the truth began to take shape, clear, unavoidable, and far more dangerous than any accusation ever made against me. Marissa didn't answer right away. She opened her mouth, closed it, then glanced at her lawyer as if searching for permission. He leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but the judge raised a hand. "This is not a question for counsel," he said. "I asked you." The room felt smaller suddenly, closer. The confidence Marissa had worn like armor all morning began to crack. "No," she said finally. "I didn't object." The word hung in the air, heavier than any accusation that had come before it. The judge nodded once and returned to the documents. He moved through them methodically, asking precise questions, each one peeling away another layer of the story that had been presented. With every answer, the picture shifted not dramatically, but decisively. What had been framed as recklessness was revealed as responsibility. What had been called secrecy was shown to be delegation. What had been labeled mismanagement was, in fact, management done quietly, consistently, and with full authorization. Marissa's lawyer attempted to regain control. He objected. He reframed. He argued intent. But the ground beneath him was gone. The judge listened patiently, then spoke. "This court is not here to punish competence," he said, "nor to validate internal family power struggles disguised as legal concern." A ripple moved through the gallery. People straightened in their seats, pens paused. Eyes shifted not toward me, but toward my sister. The judge turned to her again. "Miss Carter," he said, "you initiated this action, claiming protection of shared interests. Yet the evidence indicates that you benefited from your sister's work while publicly distancing yourself from its outcomes." Marissa said nothing. "For years," he continued, "you raised no objections. Only when boundaries were requested did concerns suddenly arise." He closed the file. "This court finds no basis for the claims presented against Miss Elena Carter." Relief washed over me, not as a rush, but as a steady release, like air returning to a room that had been sealed too long. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he added, "this case reflects a misuse of legal process to apply pressure rather than resolve harm. While the court will not pursue sanctions today, it strongly advises reconsideration of further action." It was measured, fair, final. I hadn't won by defeating my sister. I had won by refusing to become what she expected me to be. As the hearing concluded, Marissa remained seated. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. The certainty that had once defined her posture was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar: exposure. My parents sat frozen, faces pale. The narrative they had accepted so easily had collapsed in front of them, piece by piece. No shouting, no drama, just truth, laid out carefully, undeniably. I gathered my papers quietly. No one applauded. No one needed to. As I stood to leave, the judge met my eyes one last time. "You showed restraint," he said. "That matters." Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low conversation. People avoided my gaze now, not out of judgment, but out of discomfort. It's hard to look at someone when you realize you were wrong about them. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't wait for explanations. Justice, I learned that day, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with clarity. And clarity, once seen, cannot be taken back. I walked away not vindictive, not triumphant, but whole. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's burden. I was carrying only myself. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, the air felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. For years, I believed strength meant endurance, that loyalty meant silence, that love required absorbing blame so others could feel secure. I wore those beliefs like armor, never realizing how heavy they had become. The ruling didn't just clear my name. It gave me permission to let go. I didn't return to my parents' house. I didn't call my sister. I didn't wait for explanations or apologies that might never come. Some truths don't need to be discussed again. They simply need to be acknowledged and then left behind. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life quietly. I separated what was mine from what never truly belonged to me. I chose work that respected my boundaries. I learned to say no without guilt, and yes, without fear. It wasn't dramatic. It was peaceful. And peace, I learned, is a powerful form of justice. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in my story, I want you to hear something clearly. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it means preparation. Sometimes it means choosing the right moment instead of the loudest one. Family betrayal cuts deep because it comes wrapped in familiarity. But shared blood does not excuse shared harm. You are allowed to protect yourself even from the people who raised you. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away free. Free from roles I never chose. Free from expectations that only flowed one direction. Free from the need to prove my worth to people who only valued my convenience. If you've ever been quietly holding everything together while someone else took the credit. If you've ever been blamed the moment you set a boundary. If you've ever been made to feel disposable for finally choosing yourself, you're not alone. And you're not wrong. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. About standing still long enough for the truth to catch up. If you've made it this far, then maybe a part of my story touched something inside you. I didn't share this to be praised, and I didn't tell it to shame anyone. I shared it because I know how many people live quietly under unfair judgment, carrying responsibility while being denied respect. For a long time, that was me. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have spoken sooner, fought louder, or stayed silent, trusting that truth would eventually surface? I'd truly like to hear your thoughts, because every perspective carries wisdom shaped by experience. Your comments don't just support me, they help others who are quietly facing similar battles. Here's what this journey taught me, and what I hope you can take into your own life. First, silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's patience. Knowing when to speak matters just as much as knowing what to say. Second, boundaries are not betrayal. When people react badly to your boundaries, it often reveals how much they benefited from you having none. And finally, justice doesn't always need revenge. You don't have to destroy someone to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, the most powerful response is clarity, calm, and the courage to walk away clean. If you're listening to this and you feel unseen, unappreciated, or blamed for things you didn't do, please remember this. Your worth does not depend on who acknowledges it. Truth has a way of rising, especially when you stop carrying what was never meant to be yours alone. If my story resonated with you, I invite you to support it, not just by liking this video, but by sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories where quiet strength wins, where dignity outlasts manipulation, and where justice comes without cruelty, please consider subscribing to this channel and turning on notifications. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for listening. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the bravest lesson of all.